Should an employer ever put somebody in a situation where they have a permanent disability because of the job that they did? Think about that question. You get a job over here and you have this repetitive motion. You're sitting there picking stuff up, you're twisting your body, picking up a 50-pound box over here. And then you quit the job. And then 7 years later, because of that twisting motion, you now have a pain in your back the rest of your entire life because you did that one job. These are things that employers need to pay attention to in the aspect of employee safety. There's a whole body of laws out there in the process. If you go back in history, 2000, in 1910, as you went through, it was pretty common to sit down there and have an employer having a workplace where employees walk through. They have a giant belt from the basement going up to the third floor, and the belt didn't have any guards in it. And if you happen to be unfortunate enough to trip and fall into one of the belts and had your arm torn off in the process, then you sat down there, you were fired because you couldn't do your job the next day. I kid you not, that was actually the law out there, that employer had a right to hire somebody who couldn't do their job. They didn't have an obligation to have a safe workplace. And really, you have a lot of different things that have changed. A lot of laws have been implemented over the years to really sit down and help focus on employee safety as you go through. The number one law out there is the federal law called OSHA. OSHA, it stands for Occupational Safety and Health Act as you go through. You also have a lot of states that are out there and that have their own version of OSHA. In our case, in California, we have Cal-OSHA, C-A-L-O-S-H-A. And that being said, it expands on the law. Now, just so you know, here's an important rule. A state cannot reduce the impact of a federal law. A state can expand on the federal law as you go through. So keep that in mind as you go through. A state law cannot reduce the scope of a federal law, but it can expand on it as you go through. Put that in your notes. It's a big deal. You need to know that if you're going to work in human resources as you go through. Employer rights, you have a general duty clause as you go through, and really to making certain that the employee sits down there and they can come to work on a regular basis and have a safe environment as you go through. Employees have a right to have a safe and healthy workplace. They should know the hazardous chemicals in their workplaces. That comes by having data sheets. Even for a custodian working in a custodial closet, there should be a binder there to show them the different chemicals they're working with. If you're working with some fume or whatever, you should know what's going on, the impact it could have on you as you go through. There should be an annual report on injuries and illnesses in the workplace. There should be, these are all required, by the way. Employees need to have access to this information. An employee can complain and request a hazard correction from an employer. They should receive annual training about workplace environments on a regular basis, whether it's online, in person as you go through. It should be documented, part of the personnel file as you go through. They should have hazard exposure and medical records if necessary. If they have filed a complaint with the OSHA, okay, they should have access to that. They have a right to do that. And with no retaliation, by the way, they should be able to participate in an OSHA inspection and be free from retaliation for exercising their rights. It's a big deal. So pay attention to these 9 rights that you have underneath OSHA as you go through. Sometimes OSHA can come in, somebody may call up OSHA and say, we have this problem over here. And the OSHA inspector shows up and they says, okay, we're going to come through, we're going to work through your workplace. Okay, here's the dates I have available. You can schedule with them, or they can show up on their own and just all of a sudden impose themselves if they choose to do so. They have a right to review records from the personnel files over different injuries as you go through. The compliance officer as you go through, usually they have a representative of the employer walking with them. They have a walk around tour of the employee's premises on a regular basis. Make certain you're diplomatic if that person's you. They may interview employees that they come across during the tour. And in a closing conference, the compliance officer will discuss findings as they go through, noting any violations. So generally, this is always a friendly visit where they go through, look at different things. They're pretty specific if you got a problem as you go through the process. The thing I always recommend you in human resources, you have an annual inspection from a friendly person called your insurance agent, and you go through the whole campus and the site that you're going through, making certain you don't have any problems with OSHA violations, because it's in your insurance company's best interest that you have a safe workplace, and that way nobody sues over a hazard, a chemical hazard, a trip hazard, or whatever. And that way, that kind of gives you the ability to sit there and circumvent anybody claiming an OSHA violation because you've already checked it on a regular basis. It's a really positive thing to do. That being said, make certain you comply with OSHA, because it's not the insurance company's job to make certain you comply. It is your job as an organization to make sure you do that. Citations and penalties. Compliance officer, they can give you a citation. You could have an exact practice that you are to correct as you go through. The employer has to post the citation on bulletin boards around the site. They can assess a fine. Sometimes they assess a fine based upon pending resolution of it. Sometimes they have criminal penalties that can be assessed as well. Depends how egregious the different violation is as you go through. OSHA has helped raise the effective awareness on occupational safety. It doesn't regulate employee behavior, and it tends to regulate employer behavior, and also give you more important aspect of what the employer should do. For instance, if you ever work in the aspect of machinery, okay, you have a lockout tagout system as you go through. An electrician comes by to work on a motor, they sit down and they have a lock that they actually go through to the switch. They put the lock on top of the switch. They have their key to lock that switch to make certain that motor cannot be turned on while they're working on it. It may not sound like much, except for the fact if you got a giant motor and all of a sudden it comes on and you're working underneath it and it can rip off part of your body, you sure want to have some safety practice. That is part of the OSHA regulation called lockout tagout as you go through to make certain that nobody will accidentally do something inappropriate for you in the process. Those are rules that are passed over experience, making certain you have the environment of a safe workplace as you go through. There should be a good, solid safety awareness program. Even environments you would think that are all desk work related and everything else, you still have problems there over tripping things, over repetitive motion syndrome as you go through. Have a way to go through, bring somebody that really is gifted in ergonomics as you go through, even have an ergonomic consultant come through. You'd be surprised how many problems they can solve before they become workers' comp injuries as you go through. Identify job hazards and problems that you have, and also go through, make certain you communicate the risk through a multitude of different media, making certain employers really know what's going on. A lot of times it's training as you go through, not just for new employees, but also older ones as you go through. Reinforce safe practices as you go through. I mean, literally, sometimes people get sloppy over time. They've been doing it for 4 or 5 years. You got people on a 12-foot ladder trying to reach something 16 feet up. They're standing on the very top rung. If you see that, call people out on it in the practice as you go through. Make certain you have intelligent practices on a regular basis out there. Have regular training on the different aspects of it. My recommendation, depending on the level, is a minimum of 2 trainings on an annual basis on OSHA practices that affect the employee in their area. It can be online. There's a lot of packages out there, or face-to-face as you go through. Sometimes on an international basis, sometimes people don't pay attention to them as you go through. It's almost humorous sometimes when you see other countries where people are building scaffoldings up on really thin different pieces of wood structures for scaffolding and everything else, and people are bouncing up and down. In the United States, it'd be unheard of. That being said, be careful on cultural differences, what you're imposing and what you're talking about as you go through. A 10-step program to go through and evaluate injuries. If you're a supervisor, you're going to end up conducting different investigations if you have an injury on the job. Go through, look at it, test the employees to establish a baseline as you go through. An eyewear, have eyewear designed for different operations. There's few things worse than having somebody having their eyes damaged in the process. So you go through and have different aspects of it really out there. If you have any kind of shrapnel or any kind of pieces of metal, parts, paper, whatever out there, have a different way of dealing with it, and deal with it if you have a problem, or if you think there could be a problem, deal with it ahead of time as you go through. OSHA is all about employers creating a safe work environment. In my opinion, you should never have a work environment where you're expecting somebody to sacrifice part of their body for the rest of their lives because of your sloppy work practices. Have a safe work environment, create a safe environment. Don't comply with the law because you have to. Comply with the law because it's better off for your employees. Have safety awareness programs. Have an annual inspection by your organization. The insurance company utilize their services in that process. Promote safety on a regular basis. No one should be physically damaged because of their occupation. Take care.